Resident Evil Outbreak File 2.
Resident Evil is one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history ever. It is up there with the likes of Halo, Half-Life, Doom, Gears of War, etc. My voice just cracked. Stop right there, you criminal. If you want this channel to succeed, you only need to do two things. 1. Leave a like, and 2. Leave a comment on why Capcom is bad, and was one of the main pioneers of the survival horror genre for video games. Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil Code Veronica all sold millions upon millions of copies worldwide, reaching numbers as high as tens of millions. Obviously, all of this was achieved due to the help of being multi-platform games. Resident Evil 1 was released for the PS1, Saturn, and the DS. Resident Evil 2 was released on the Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, and the GameCube. Resident Evil 3 was released on the PS1 and GameCube, and Resident Evil Code Veronica was released for the PS2, Dreamcast, PS3, and the Xbox 360. I could talk about the sales of Resident Evil 4 and 5, which are the most popular entries of Resident Evil games, but those games are irrelevant for the topic of why we never got to play Resident Evil Outbreak File 3. There are many reasons why we never got to play Outbreak File 3, with stuff like very in quotes low sales numbers, and I say in quotes because at the time those sales numbers were extremely low for Capcom standards. The idea of the first Resident Evil Outbreak game was conceived even before Resident Evil 2 was released, like back in 1998. Capcom wanted to be one of the very first developers to publish a survival horror game with the aspect of multiplayer on it. So, Shinji Mikami, the director for the first Resident Evil game, said to one of his developers, Funamisu, that he should make a demo build of that idea. When Funamisu finished the build of the game and released it in private, the issues were very simple to see. The game was supposed to make the players work together to solve puzzles, fight the horde of zombies, BOWs, and overall beat the scenario. But, like every single multiplayer-only fashion experience, players left their teammates to their deaths, took over all of the important loot, weapons, they wouldn't share herbs or ammo, and the game was an outstanding disaster of what it was supposed to be. So they abandoned that idea. Fast forward to 2002, Capcom revived the idea, as they had gathered enough research to make the idea of Outbreak work. And they did it. One of the many strong marketing points about Resident Evil Outbreak was that it was running on a heavily modified version of the eTech 3 engine, which helped the game render 3D models in real life. All of the Resident Evil games released before Outbreak were all using pre-rendered 2D models, with fixed camera angles that wouldn't move. It felt like the game wasn't even alive, because the only thing that was actually moving on screen was your character and the pre-rendered 3D models. But in Outbreak, everything was rendered on 3D real time. While doing my research for this topic, I was trying to find if Resident Evil Outbreak had some type of marketing back in the day. You know, trailers, commercials, things like that. And I was able to find all sorts of things for previous Resident Evil titles, but I wasn't able to find a single thing for Outbreak, for the exception of a multiplayer trailer. Back in the day, and I mean like in 2003, 2004, having an internet connection was an outright privilege, and even if you were able to have an internet connection, having the sufficient amount of network power to sustain an online match with players from another country was an outright challenge. Kids nowadays will never know how bad the internet connection was back in the day, and if they knew, they would have smashed their controllers instantly. Resident Evil Outbreak is a game set to be played online. Yeah, you can play it offline and still have a fantastic time, but the game was marketed to be the very first survival horror online co-op game to be made. And for Japan, Outbreak was a wild success, as the Japanese people were all able to play Resident Evil online whenever they wanted. But what about North America or Europe? Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 never had an online mode for those regions. Never. It all was fixed when Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 was released. But the game tanking in sales that hard just tells me that people from America and Europe didn't even bother with that game. First because Outbreak and Outbreak File 2 were first released on Japan, and then months later were released on North America, and then months later on Europe. So having different release schedules that far apart just outright killed the game. That's why now every game releases the same day for everyone and anyone in the world, because that releasing system is not and was never sustainable on the first place. Another reason why Outbreak had poor sales was because the game was heavily marketed to be a multiplayer game. Yeah, when I bought the game I was 9 years old, so I didn't even bother with the idea that I couldn't play the game at its full potential. I was just happy playing as my boy Kevin on every scenario, killing zombies and having an absolute blast. My voice just cracked. But now that I have played the game almost 12 years ago from where I last played it, I can see the very issues my little baby eyes couldn't see a long time ago. The AI is outright silly. It sometimes won't even give me the item I am requesting, which are needed to progress the development and the plot of the game. Sometimes at the most crucial situations they will pretty much run away and leaving me behind to my death, and sometimes will pretty much die out of nowhere, like they were never there. Like, actually, what the hell? Resident Evil Outbreak is one of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time, and I am dying to do a review on this game, so if this video reaches 1000 likes, which I really wanted to do, I will do a review of the game. Right around when Outbreak File 3 was being developed, Capcom had began its fourth, yes, you heard me, its fourth remake of the development of Resident Evil 4. Like, really, Resident Evil 4 might be one of the most iconic games of all time, but the game was an outright roller coaster of development. The Japanese people are very determined on doing their very best until their last breath. Resident Evil 4 was first going to follow the same exact formula as the other Resident Evil titles, but instead of having pre-rendered 3D models for the game, it was going to have the Resident Evil Outbreak route, where the angled camera was fixated to the movement of the player, not being still until the player reaches the range of another angled camera. The story was good and all. In summary, Leon was trapped inside a castle of Umbrella. He was infected with the T-virus, got some weird power on his left hand, and he was being chased by the fog. And the only reason why they didn't continue with this version of the game, and even though they were 40% complete, was because the hardware from the GameCube, which was the console Resident Evil 4 was going to launch with, wasn't able to render the monster completely, making the game utterly unplayable. So, Capcom had some very important meeting regarding the development of Resident Evil 4, and a new director for the game was appointed. Mikami had a vision no one had for Resident Evil 4. He said he wanted to get rid of fixed camera angles and change it to be an over-the-shoulder point of view. No zombies, no umbrella, and set the game to be a survival horror action game. Pretty much reinvent the whole series, and while some of the developers agreed with him, some of them outright thought that he was crazy. But in a meeting, he expressed himself on the grandiose ideas and vision he had for the game, and said that doing Resident Evil 4 like any other Resident Evil game was already outright boring, and that his heart didn't skip a bit when playing the new entries for the first time, but that Resident Evil 4, even though having most of its core mechanics change, and pretty much the genre, it still felt like a Resident Evil game, and that shows on its amazing success worldwide. After Resident Evil 4's success, it was all sounding clear that previous Resident Evil titles wouldn't make it out there in the wilderness if they followed the steps of its predecessors. So ever since Resident Evil 4 was released, there hasn't been another traditional Resident Evil game released. And that, my friends, is the very reason why we never got Outbreak File 3. The combination of having bad sales because of bad release schedules, the multiple problems with online servers, and the outright success of the new Resident Evil genre, Capcom decided to bury forever the Resident Evil Outbreak franchise, even though File 3 was already in development a long time before Resident Evil 4 was a thing. Resident Evil Outbreak's failure is a mix of a lot of things, honestly. Like I said before, it was a mix of bad sales because of poor servers and poor multiplayer development, bad sales because bad release schedules, because first it was released for Japanese people and years later it was released for Europe and North America, and because of right when Outbreak File 3 was being developed, all the thing with Resident Evil 4 happened, and pretty much Capcom knew that survival horror fixated camera angles was already boring because they had Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, 0, Code Veronica 5 Resident Evil games that all follow the exact same formula, and well, Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 and File 2, so 7 Resident Evil games that followed the exact same formula. And obviously people wanted something new, and Resident Evil 4, even though it was a very controversial development, it was a huge success, and Capcom was forced, because money, to change the formula of the Resident Evil games, and that's why they never developed another traditional Resident Evil title. But one of the main things why Resident Evil Outbreak was such a failure, well, it was not a failure. In total, it sold 1.5 million copies. Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 sold 1.3 million copies, and Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 sold 200,000 copies. So the actual failure was Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. One of the main reasons why was because people knew that the servers were going to be crap and they didn't bother to buy the game. And second of all, because this happened a long time ago, but Capcom really did a really bad move with Resident Evil Outbreak. It was supposed to be a single game with 20 scenarios, but they cut content and they were like, oh, Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 will have 5 scenarios, File 2 will have 6 scenarios, and File 3 will have the remaining scenarios. So they cut content all the way back to 2003 and sold it to us as a DLC. And obviously people like me that were 9 years old, I didn't care, but people like that were 20 years old, they were like, oh no, I am not buying this. Let's boycott Resident Evil Outbreak or something like that. But the most important reason why Resident Evil Outbreak did so poorly was because it was a PS2 exclusive, and every single Resident Evil title before and after Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 and 2 are all multi-platform games. The only reason why Resident Evil 4 is such a hit is because it was released on the GameCube, PS2, Xbox 360, PS3, Xbox One, PS4, Steam, PC, Nintendo Switch, the Wii, and even to DS and Android devices. Like, that's why it's such a hit. And Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 and not Operation Racoon City or Umbrella Corps. Resident Evil Outbreak is the only Resident Evil game that is exclusive to one console, so that is why it failed so hard. If it was released for the GameCube or the Dreamcast, I think it would have been good for them, but Resident Evil was marketed to be a multiplayer experience, and the only console that had network connections on that time was the PS2, so yeah. Everything was set for Resident Evil Outbreak to die immediately. So I think 1.5 million copies on one console for Capcom, that is good. So if they were to release another Outbreak game right now with HD graphics and a remap of the controls, I think it would do very good, but that is for another video. Resident Evil Outbreak didn't just die, it was murdered. But with Capcom being all goody buddy on doing remakes for the Resident Evil franchise, we might see Outbreak be remaked in the future, who knows, but that is for another video. And so, okay, Spartans, if you guys didn't notice, my voice is literally leaving my body, and I'm like look, my voice wants to crack every I cannot even speak. And so, okay, Spartans, please leave a comment down below what you think about this video. Leave a like if you did, and leave a dislike if you didn't. This video This video was an outright pain to record, my voice is leaving my body, so I will really appreciate a like from your part. Do not forget to follow me on Twitter, Instagram and on Twitch, join the Discord server, and I think I'm going to go and have some pills or something. And so okay Spartans, that is all for today. If you guys liked the video, slap a like on it, I will greatly appreciate it. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye bye, take care, and I love you very very much. Thank you for watching Spartans, I really do appreciate it. Bye bye. Mwah.